All right, I'll go ahead and get started. Can you all hear me okay? Is this working? All right. This presentation is how evil Kirk uses Maltego. This is the first time I've ever even been to a security conference, let alone speaking in front of a bunch of people, so I'm a little nervous. Sorry. But next slide here. Who am I? My name is Robert McMahon. I started off in the IT industry and help desk like many people. Worked at JPMorgan Chase for 3 years, helping people turn on and off printers. And then I got picked up to be a mentor at Tech Skills, which is a trade school, so I helped. There we go. All right, so I helped a lot of people get IT certifications. How to use those help desk skills today. Stay. All right, and I was a mentor there for about 3 years. And it was a school that was mostly for people like us who just want to pick up certification to get better and to get a better job. After that, I got really lucky and I got in at EPS Financial as just a junior software developer. I got in at the bottom floor there and I helped them build their entire code base for the whole company. So it was a really good experience. Started from the bottom. We designed the database, built it from the ground up, and it was an awesome experience. And then recently they needed to get PCI compliant and they knew that I was into security and they moved me over to be their information security analyst. So that's my history. And I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for Litacode and Brian. Love you, Brian. And anything that goes wrong in this, I blame on Litacode. All right, so there's really two things that I'm going to talk about today. One is a local transform API written in .NET for Maltego. And then the main thing that most of you are probably interested in is the transforms to enumerate information from inside a Windows domain. So I'm going to start off with the API in .NET. It's written in C#. There was when I was using Maltego, and I noticed that there's APIs out there for PHP. There's one for Python. I think there's one for C as well, but I really like C#. It's my main code, it's my main language, so I just said, why not write an API? So I guess the first thing I'm going to show you the code to using this API to find the robots.txt. Because finding robots.txt to me is kind of like the hello world of Maltego transforms. I guess if are you all familiar with Maltego and transforms? Local transforms? All right, so with this API, I won't go into the internal code of the API because we'll be here forever, but just the general overview of how to use it. You always start off by creating a Maltego response generator object, and that's what everything's going to go into. So you're going to add different entities like a phrase entity or a website or whatever you're going to add when you're doing your logic. So in this one, we want to find the robots.txt of any website. So when also there we go. All right. So when Maltego passes in an entity from the palette, there's going to be two arguments. The first argument is going to be the entity value. So I'll fire up Maltego in a second. So if it's a website, for example, it'll be www.google.com will be what's passed through as your first argument. Your second argument is any special values or extra values that are on there, and it's field name equals field value, field 2 equals field 2 value, and it's separated by a hash, pound, sharp symbol, whatever you want to call that. in this case, and in most cases, you're only going to use the first argument to do your work on. Some cases, you might use the other ones. But in this case, we're only going to use the first argument. So the first thing I have here is just a demonstration of how to add a simple UI message that will show up in Maltego in the bottom, so you can debug or just show any messages to the user at the bottom there. You just pass an UI message type debug, and in this case, it will just pass in whatever website gets passed through to the application. And then here, I'm building the URI to get to the robots.txt file. I like path.combine, but I decided to try this way using URI objects, and it works really well. And that helps just build the URI to pass to the web client to actually get to the robots.txt file. So down here, we just use web client download string from the robots.txt file. And then for each line in the robots.txt file, so each entry, we're going to add a phrase entity to Maltego. And then here we have our catches. So if there's like a 404, for example, or a 500 error, we're going to show just a partial error. If there's some other exception, we're going to show a fatal error, and we're going to show the message to the user. And then at the end of every program, you do console.writeLine, get Maltego message text, and that just serializes the object. Just serializes the object into an XML object. So all of the XML is done for you. You don't have to make sure your XML is properly formed. You don't have to worry about it throwing in a parser exception when it gets back to Maltego. So what's that? Actually, I wanted to do a demo, but I'm afraid to connect to Wi-Fi here. But we'll see. Does anybody know the SC? C, capital C? E-N-T-P-E-T-I. Okay. That's why I was afraid of it. All right, I'm going to try one more time. All right, I was hoping to do it, but I guess the demo gods aren't with me today. But basically, to do it, you would usually have something other, like you start off with a domain and then you run a level 3 machine on it to get all this information from it. But you eventually get to a website, right-click it, do get robots. This isn't going to work because I'm not connected, but you get the picture, and then it will give you back separate phrase entities, so it will look something like this. Where are our phrases? There we go. So it'll have a separate phrase for disallow. WP login. Be connected to that, so you all get the picture. All right, so let's go to the next part. That's just the API, something really easy to use that you can use C# code to interface with Maltego, and you can write your own logic using C# and using the Windows libraries. Awesome. All right, that was the fun part. The internal domain transforms. So there's a series of new entities that I created for Maltego, specifically for internal components. So you have your domain, which represents the internal domain, so domain.local or whatever your internal domain name is. There are computers, which represent computers, workstations, servers, any kind of device inside the domain. Distribution groups and security groups, just groups inside your domain. User accounts, obviously user accounts. Email delegates and email read. I could have named that better, but the email delegate is an account that can send email on behalf of another person. So if I can send, like usually you see it with like a sales department, somebody can send sales@yourcompany.com. And then email read is somebody that has full access to another user's email. This is just the beginning of them. There's going to be a lot more in the future. This is not completely done. There's actually a lot that can really be done with these internal transforms, which I'll get into that in a minute, like shoveling shells, which is really fun. And then the new transforms themselves, there are domain transforms which find computers, they find all the users in the domain, groups in the domain, security groups, distribution groups. Group transforms that you can run on these groups, so they find members of the group, subgroups of that group, things like that. User transforms, so you can find the user's email address, phone numbers, groups that they're in as well, and computer transforms, which you can do things like shovel a shell, find user accounts that have logged into that computer, find the operating system, the patch level that it's currently on, fun things like that. All right, and actually, I'm not going to use this slide. I'm actually going to go into the code because I've written more code than I have on in the presentation. So right now I have a massive switch for the main argument that comes in. Well, first of all, I guess we'll go into how we add these into Maltego. Not. All right, forget that. We'll just go right into the code. All right, so these are the transforms that I have done so far, and there's a lot more, and if any of you want to jump in and do some development as well, just let me know, hit me up via email or see me after the conference, because there's a lot more that can be done with this. This can really, I think that we can take Maltego and turn it into I know most of you are going to laugh at this name, but turn it into like an arbitrage, where you can do you can automate a lot of your internal penetration testing just through Maltego itself. So these are the transforms that have been done so far, and there's a lot more, and I'm probably going to get rid of this large switch statement, because that's pretty large, and go to some like open-closed model later on.
So these transforms is something you can just take off the shelf and use?
Yeah, once you can get the code from my Bitbucket account, which I'll have up here on one of the later slides. But you import them into Maltego, and you just use them right off the shelf. Yeah, and I can show you guys how to do that. I don't have that in the presentation, but if anybody wants to, if anybody doesn't know how to import things into Maltego, let me know, and I'll show you how. I don't mind sitting with people. So here, the first thing is internal domain to computers. This just gets all of the computers that are in the domain, and this is run from the standpoint of any domain user. So if you pop a box inside of a domain and you're a lower level user, as long as that user can see these computers in the domain, as long as they can contact the domain controller, you can use these. So you don't have to be domain admin or local admin even. This is equivalent of like when you open up Outlook and you're searching for a user in the domain. So it's anybody that can see these, you can use this on. You don't have to be domain admin. You do have to be on a machine inside the network. So this can be used by pen testers that get into a network, or we've used it at my work to help root out people that were in groups that shouldn't have been in those groups, or like we put them in and forgot about them. So the first one is internal domain to computers. It finds all the computers inside that domain. The second one is internal domain to all groups. So it finds all of the security groups and all the distribution groups in that domain and puts them on the graph for you, very nice and neat. Then there's separate ones for just security groups and just distribution groups if you're just interested in those individual groups. Internal domain to users. That gets all of the users in the domain, or all of the users that you can see in the domain, and puts them out there on the graph for you. And then group to member groups, all the subgroups inside a group. So I usually start off with doing internal domain to computers and internal domain to all groups, and then highlighting all the groups and running group to users. So you get all the users in the groups, and it looks great. Group to member groups, that's any groups that are inside that group. So if you have an HR group, and then you have HR admins versus HR employees or HR temp reps. Group to users gets all the users inside that group. User to all groups, and user to distribution groups, and user to security groups. These are just to get the groups that the user are in. So if you start off with just getting the users and you want to go kind of backwards, you can do that. User to email addresses will get you all of the email addresses of that user that are assigned to that user. User to phone numbers, you can find the phone numbers that are assigned to that user. And this is just in the domain. So like in my domain, for example, we don't store that in Active Directory, so you won't see that, but in some domains you will. Internal domain to email addresses, this just gets all of the email addresses in the domain. So if you want to do something later on, social engineering, grab all these email addresses, you can export them to an Excel file and send away emails. You set user to email read, that's takes a user as the input, and then any email that user has access to that user can read. So the forms email, the sales email box, anything that they can read, that's going to spit that out to you. With delegates, that's anything that the user can send emails to. So the sales user, for example, can send sales@yourcompany.com. Computer to operating system is just going to return a phrase that shows the operating system for that computer. And computers is where I'm really lacking right now, just because I didn't have that much time to code on it, but that's going to come later. But you can do a lot of things like get the operating system, get the patch level of the operating system. And then the last one on here is computer to remote shell using ps-exec. So it'll just, this was really fun. I did it yesterday. I just got all the computers in my domain. I highlighted all of them, and I got about 61 shells. Actually, I have a screenshot of it. They just started popping admin shells on all these computers.
Essentially, the network is totally vulnerable to all this, and what any kind of defense?
Well, it's not really vulnerable, because I have my account has access to this stuff, and I'm running it as my account. But if you were to get in, and I know a lot of companies use a common local admin on all of their machines in the network, if you were to get that, you can put that into this, you can give that as an input, and you just have it go to each machine and just ask each machine to shovel a shell back to you. And you get a ton of shells.
Are
Or you
you
can do it on one.
credentials to the transform, or do you have to have a domain join the machine?
I put the credentials, if it's a local credential, I have an app.config file. This is not my company's internal. This is just a sample one. But you put it into the app.config file, and that's like if you have a local password. If you don't have a local, it's just going to use whatever credentials you were logged in as.
So you would have to join the domain if you're trying to use the domain.
Yes, yeah. If you're going to run this in a domain, you would have to have a user in the domain, or have popped a box where you have a user that's authenticated on that domain.
Would you need to install Maltego on the box then? So
No, you don't have to install Maltego. I intentionally made this to where it's just one executable you have to drop. So that way, where is it? Right there. It's a large name. You can rename it if you want to. But yeah, I intentionally made it to where it's just one executable you can drop into a machine that you've popped or whatever, and then it will spit out the last thing it does is spits out the XML that you can import into Maltego later. So you don't have to set up Maltego on the inside of a network. You can just move this executable file there, and I'll show you the command line arguments here. Actually, I do need to fire up Maltego.
The binary executes, runs all your commands, outputs it into Maltego XML,
Yes.
and you drag that back.
Yeah, and Maltego reads it just reads standard out. So that's how it reads that back.
How do you get the XML back to you? I mean, are you in a penetration test or an exploit sort of scenario?
Say that again?
How are you getting the XML back to you? Is that something you're doing automatically, or?
It depends on how you got the shell. So like if you just have just a regular command shell and you can upload this and you can run the transform, copy and paste it back, and then put it into it's just a .xml file, and you can import that into Maltego, so you can look at a nice pretty graph of it. This is manage transforms. I'm going to just go through, like, we're adding a new one. So let's say we're adding one for internal domain to computers. So you go up here if you want to add the transform. Now this, you'll be able to import this from my Bitbucket account. You should be able to just import this right in, so you don't have to go through and add all of these locally. But just to give you an idea of how the arguments for the application work, if you're just going to use it from the command line, this will give you some insight into that. So, call this user accounts. The input entity type, we're going to say is the domain.
You're using this just for a domain that you have access to, but can you use that idea to go into a foreign network?
This is
what would you need to do that?
This would be done from the standpoint as you're already in that network. So
Yeah,
either you're an admin on that network and you want to get more information about your own network, or you've just popped the box inside the network, and this is so you can quickly find other machines on that network instead of just Nmap scanning or something like that, because Nmap can be pretty loud or doing something else that might be picked up by an IDS, IPS. This is something that probably wouldn't be picked up by that, and you can get all of this information without having to do loud things.
If you wanted to use it, say, in another network, you'd have to get permission from that network.
Correct. Yeah, you'd have to get into that.
It's not like
Yeah. Yep. All right. So we have the local transform, master.exe, and then in the parameters here, you can take them right out of the switch. So right here, this is the argument that you would pass in. So whatever transform you want to run, you just pass in that argument. So if we wanted to do, what do we say, user accounts, internal domain to users. And finished. So when Maltego calls this, it's going to call it with the entity value, and then it's going to call with, it's going to call the executable file with the transform that I want to use. So it's going to be internal domain to users, and then you pass in the entity value. So if you're calling this from the command line, it would look just like this. You can usually ignore this field 1, field 2 part, because you're just going to be using, for the most part, just the first argument. So if your internal domain is BSides.local, for example, you would pass in, if you're calling it from the command line, you would say internal domain to users, BSides.local, and it'll enumerate all of the users in that internal domain. So this is a sample graph from a network that I have access to, and this is from a limited user. And I just quickly enumerated all of the groups and then all of the users inside those groups in that domain. So, can you guys, is that? Okay. Let me see if I can zoom in. I cannot zoom in. All right, so the top part there, that's just the domain. I just dragged on the domain, typed in domain.local, and ran the transform to get all the groups inside the domain. All of these purple are security groups, the brown are distribution groups, and you can, and the pink are user accounts. So you can obviously tell that this one right here is just the user account, the built-in user account for the domain, and all of these are just users in there. Each of these are a separate security group in the domain, and you can tell which user belongs to which security group. So we use this in my company to help weed out. We have a lot of people that come and go, a lot of contractors that come and go, and people get left in groups that they shouldn't be in, and there's all kinds of new groups that get started up, and you have to delete them. So we just use this periodically to audit our groups. So that's kind of a non-pen testing way of using it, or you can use it in a pen test and find all of the groups, so you know like who's in the domain admins, or you can see other groups that have administrators in them, and you want to get those accounts and try to find them and pop those. So this is just a one example of something that you can use this for to find, and this is quick. When I ran this, I wish I could have done a demonstration in here, but I didn't have time to set up a domain, an example domain. But this took about 5 seconds to run. So imagine if you're doing this without this tool and you scan all of the computers in the network, you run Nmap on everything in the network, how long that would take and how noisy that would be compared to this. So this is kind of a more close-up. You can see that that's just the standard user account in the domain, or the standard user group, and these are all of the users that aren't really tied to any other groups. These users are tied to other groups. And that was my shells. Had fun with that. And that was that for do you guys have any questions for me?
In your reporting, I was thinking about if you inherited a large domain that hadn't been crewed up in a long time.
Yeah.
You could find like user objects, computer objects that just go back. You know, from a thinking. I guess I'm trying to put it in terms of like LDAP queries and stuff.
Yeah.
When it gives you your output, will it give you historical information like last time you logged on?
You can find that. I haven't coded that in, but yeah, you can definitely find that. I'm using on some things I'm using LDAP queries. On most of them, I'm using the newer principal context and principal searcher. But on the things like the emails, I'm using the old LDAP query. So yeah, anything that you can query in LDAP, you can write a transform for it in here and have it pop up. So anything that you can do in that, and it's not just restricted to just Active Directory. It's anything that you can do. Like I have one repository that I'm going to work on that's WMI, so you can spray the whole network with WMI if you want to. You get all the computers and just throw WMI and everything. So what I'm going to have, there's Active Directory, there's a networking one, which will be, if you want to run port scans, finding Excel documents on remote computers you have access to, interesting documents, finding the shares on a remote computer. So once you're in there, you can find out what shares that user has access to. Finding remote drives, so like finding a C dollar or D dollar on another computer. Sysinternals. This is remote shell, or you can PS list, or anything from sysinternals. You can code into this. And if anybody, and that's the big thing, is I don't have a lot of time to code, but I'm going to keep going with this. So if any of you want to help out, jump in, let me know, and I'll let you know. Well, it's open source. It's on my Bitbucket account, but just let me know, and I'll be happy to let you in, help you out. WMI queries, custom WMI queries, and then I'll have a list of other WMI queries that you can do. That'll help find the patch level. You can use WMI to find what antivirus is running on the computer. So if you're looking for one that doesn't have antivirus on it, which are fun, or that are running an older version of it, you'll be able to do that with this.
What are the back-end query calls using? Are they like net commands or PowerShell, or how are you querying the domain?
Oh, for Active Directory, that is in here. Yeah, it's just using LDAP queries, and they're just objects in Active Directory. I'm not sure exactly how it does that, but yeah, it's just they're LDAP queries. And then these are wrappers in .NET that do this, but it looks much prettier in the code.
You've done a lot of coding for the API to get data into Maltego. Is there any API functionality for getting data back out?
Like from Maltego into XML?
From Maltego into whatever I want to do with my side of the scripting development. To get objects from Maltego into
back into
C# or any other programming language. I mean, right now you want to transform, it sends it data. Is there any other way to tap into Maltego?
Not without, not that I know of. Yeah, Maltego is mostly, you have an entity that's on the palette and you want to get information about that entity.
Yep.
So when it sends it, it's just sending that entity name to that. So, and when you send it back, you're sending back XML to Maltego. So I'm not sure, I don't know if I'm understanding your question.
So let's say you do a scan and you get all your group information. You've got this big graph here that shows all your groups, all your users.
Yeah.
Is there an easy way to say, okay, I want to pull all the users back out of this group, and I want to dump like a text file, I want to dump something else, some other sort of data to get data back out of this to use?
Kind of, yes. There's, let me see if I can drag it on a budget.
Not far.
We'll name these users.
Oh, it's got like machines and stuff on the side of it. It's a bunch of transforms. Not like it's not going to automatic a transform, have to transform itself and the export function. I'm going to do a quick way to have around other sets of things. Well, probably right there. It's almost like because I don't want to grab one of the papers. But this one, at least.
All right, so you can export. There's a few different ways. I added 3 users to a domain. Let me get rid of this. Yes. So you're talking about you want to get it out onto paper that you can show somebody
Use
else.
the PowerShell.
Or it's a power, okay, all right. Is there a way to do that? So you can export, you can generate a report, but that's going to generate a PDF report that you can give to a higher up or somebody else that wants to view it. You can export it as a table.
So there's no API that you know to actually directly interact back in here to pull that data back out.
Correct, yeah, you'd have to export it to like a CSV file, and then you can pass that into PowerShell script or something like
It's
that.
all Java, right?
But what you can do with it is, if you have a PowerShell script that accepts one entity at a time, so like one computer at a time, because this is going to call each time, you can just write a transform. You can add a local transform in there to call that PowerShell script and pass that entity to it. Any other questions?
If you pass an entity that has child nodes, do you get the children as well? Can you access the children from the API?
You can, but so if you have child nodes, it's basically whatever you highlight. So you just want to run users, run things on users, you would right click.
But you can't click, you can't select the domain when that passes to the transform. The transform can't figure out what the children are.
It's just going to do the domain, yeah, because it's Maltego runs it on whatever you have selected. So the transforms are just for the specific entity that you're running it against. So it's not, when you pass this in, it's not going to pass all the users and all the groups. It's just going to pass domain on local as a text argument.
When you're running that as a local transform, what does the return look like? How do you send it back to Maltego?
Say again?
You said that it comes to the API as an entity name.
Yes.
What does, and you're generating the XML. How do you get that XML back to Maltego?
Oh, it's just, it's standard out.
Okay.
So either one of these, like the get robots, it's just a simple console.write line.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Great.
Anything else? Or any other questions? Awesome. Thank you very much.
Great job.